Bob, an alcoholic.
Hey, Bob.
Just curious, I did this last night, but I think there's new people here. How many people are in their first 90 days? Oh, okay, welcome, glad you're here. In my house, where I live in Las Vegas, I have several pieces of pottery that sit out. Most people don't even know what they are. They don't notice anything about them that are special unless I tell you the story. And these pieces of pottery are what are known as kintsugi. And kintsugi is a Japanese form of pottery. And you just look at it and it wouldn't seem so special until you hear the story. What the story is hundreds of years ago, the emperors of Japan were deities. They were referred to as gods. Matter of fact, they had the power of life or death over everyone in Japan. And they were greatly feared and revered as deities. And the story is that this emperor had his favorite rice bowl that he'd eat forbidden rice out of, which was reserved for royalty. It's the black rice. And one of his servants cleaning up the table had dropped his favorite rice bowl, and it shattered on the floor of the palace. And he was terrified because the emperor could have his head removed. I mean, it was terrifying. And the emperor said to him, "I'm not going to execute you if you can repair that bowl as good as it was, or if not better." And it was his only hope of salvation. And he took all these fragments of this bowl, and he took them into his room, and he just sat there, and he just didn't know what to do. How am I going to ever? I mean, even if I glue it together, it won't be right. It won't be as good as it was. And someone in the palace was doing some decorating with 24-karat gold leaf and gold powder as they were touching up parts of the rooms. And he kept this idea. He took some of the gold and he mixed it in with the glue. And he glued the pieces of the bowl together. And the beauty was in the brokenness as it shined out. All the cracks, all the brokenness. And the brokenness became the beauty. And that's what we have here, I think, don't we? You see people in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've had this experience. So many of us have had, where you just sit there and your head creates an opinion about them based on the way they're dressed or based on the way they look or something. And, you just know right away you don't like them. And then you hear them tell their story in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you sit there and you realize, I suffered like you suffered. I struggled here like you struggled here. And all of a sudden, it's their brokenness that makes them beautiful. And I think we're much like that. In this 8th and 9th step, it's really, in the cleaning house process, it's really the end game. I know a lot of us, as we do step 4 and step 5, we have this erroneous concept that we're going to grow by acquiring knowledge about ourselves. And it's really not that at all. We look not to learn, we look for correction and opportunities to correct. And one of the things about amends that was confusing to me, when you have when you're egocentric and you have a big ego and you don't know it because you have no self-esteem, so it's confusing. But when you have a big ego, the ego takes you into what's right and what's wrong. And that's a great thing for ego gratification, because if you can find more wrong with the person you need to make amends to, you don't have to make amends, right? But amends are not about right and wrong. That really, truly is the domain of the ego. Amends are about mending separation. Chuck used to say there was one problem that contained all problems. It was conscious and unconscious separation. From me, between me and you, and me and God. And it's remarkable to me how we get closer to God by healing the separation between me and his kids. As I do that, God seems to become closer to me. There was an old poem many years ago in the grapevine, and it said, the poem was, I sought myself and could not see. I sought my God and he eluded me. So I sought my brother and I found all three. How we grow closer to God by growing closer, by removing the distance between us and his kids. And so the ninth step and the eighth step and ninth step are designed to set me free. That's why in the promises, it's not in the third step promises or the fifth step promises, or it's in the ninth step promises where we're promised a new freedom. And every time I've made an amends in my life, especially the ones I don't want to make, especially the ones that I'm just going to, I put off. And you know why we put them off? Because, hey, maybe that person will die. Maybe the planet will blow up. You know, maybe they'll come to their senses and make amends to me. That's the big one. And so we put it off. And the problem with that, and I've done this, and I'm sure I'm not the only one in this room that's done it, we suffer in the delay. An unmade amends, in my experience, becomes like a stone in your shoe. It may be there, and it's gnawing at you continually, and sometimes you don't notice it, but every once in a while it's like that. It comes up. And every time an unmade amends is, the person comes up, my light dims a little bit. Because I ain't right. And so, there's one of the things I learned early in sobriety from a guy. He said, kid, I want you to know that if you're explaining something, justifying something, rationalizing something, or defending something, kid, you got to know you're wrong. Because you never have to justify, explain, rationalize, or defend what's right. And so when some amends would come up, and I'd look at them on my fourth step, or discuss them somewhat in the fifth step, or later, look at my sponsor started nudging me to keep doing, keep going forward. My head would have to start talking to me, right? Just start talking to me about what's wrong with them and how this is silly, and it's years ago. They don't even remember. All the excuses, all the explanations, all the rationalizations and justifications. And yet, every time I would finally make the amends, it did something for me. I think of it often as like cutting a sandbag off the side of a hot air balloon. The amends gives my very being and spirit lift. And it's lifting me out of me, basically, because I'm a hostage of my unfinished business. I'm a hostage of it. I'm often surprised where guys that are sober a long time and they're working like crazy, just killing themselves on jobs, and they don't get anywhere financially. And I bet you I've talked to a dozen guys over the years like that. Made a couple made $100, $150, $200,000 a year, and they're broke. And we talk about it. It's often that we uncover these unmade financial amends. And we become hostage to our unfinished business. Same with relationships. Come hostage to our unfinished business. So there's a great advantage to doing this. But you don't know the advantage until after you do it. I think if you talk to most people who have bought this whole package that seem reasonably free and happy in their sobriety, they're sober a long time, they'll tell you the story of how they've uncovered, discovered, discarded, and repaired the separation between them and people, and how that benefits us. You know, one of the great justifications of... I had a guy, I was listening to his fifth step, and he came and brought me his 8-step list. I'm looking at the 8-step list, and I said, well, the drug dealer that you owe all the money to, he's not on there. And he said, well, he's a drug dealer. I don't need to make amends to a drug dealer, do I? Or does it talk about that in the book? Well, it doesn't talk about drug dealers, but it talks about even the most ruthless creditors. And that's the fear. It's fear, isn't it? The guy's going to take a baseball bat to me. It's the fear. And they had, when Alcoholics Anonymous was being formed, they didn't have ruthless drug dealers, but they had loan sharks. And they had people that would break your legs. And the book says even the most ruthless creditor, when approached in such a way, remarkable things happen. I have a dear friend who was from California. Now he comes to my home group. And he's sober a long time, probably 2 years longer than me, I think. And he told a story many years ago. When he got sober, he'd owed these scary people a whole bunch of money. I think it was well over $100,000 because he'd been fronted a whole bunch of cocaine, and it didn't seem to get sold. Hey, these things happen. And he said his sponsor wanted to make amends to the guy. He says, I can't make amends. But what happened is he started making other amends. And the other amends seemed to create fissures for God's grace to come in that eventually will change your mind about some of the unmade amends. And I think there's two things that have to happen inside of me in order to make these most difficult and frightening amends. One thing is I have to have some experience now with God to the point where I'm starting to trust Him a little bit. Because if I don't trust God, facing someone who I'm afraid that's going to take a baseball bat to me, or facing the courts where I'm afraid I'm going to go to prison, I'm not going to do it. If I don't trust Alcoholics Anonymous, trust my sponsor, trust God. So by the time he had came to this place with this drug dealer's amends, he'd had some experiences with God. And he also was developing that thing that talks about rigorous honesty. And I think there's a difference between honesty and rigorous honesty, because the honesty was, he's a drug dealer. And he was. Rigorous honesty is when you put yourself in their shoes. And you did a guy a favor. And he ripped you off. And what would that feel like in his shoes? And that's not just self-honesty. That's honesty in the big picture. I remember in early sobriety, my sponsor told me, I was talking to him about a problem I had with someone, and I said to him at one point, well, I guess I'm just sensitive. And he said, sensitive? He said, aren't sensitive people sensitive to other people's feelings? Other people's stuff? You're only sensitive to your own. We call that selfish and self-centered. So he was sensitive to the other guys, the other side of the street now. And he had trusted God and he made this amends. And he said he was scared. He said he went to this place, this house where they all were there. It was like a drug dealer's house, I guess, or dope house or something, I don't know. And he said they jumped him. I mean, they got physical with him the minute they walked in. And he said he gave them, he had an envelope with money. It wasn't all the money, but it was some. It was a significant amount. Because the book says, well, the person will be more impressed with a demonstration than our just promise saying we're sorry. So it was a significant amount of money. It was a demonstration. It wasn't like $3. It was like something like significant. And the guy took the money and he said to him, he said, listen, you, by rights in your ethic, you have the right to kill me. And I can't, if that's what you choose to do, that's what you choose to do. But I am here because I want to make this right to you. And if you don't kill me, I will pay you the rest of the debt. And they let him go. And he's made payments to this drug dealer. And he said a couple years went by. And I think he paid it off by then, or it was almost paid off. And he got a phone call from the guy, the drug dealer. And the drug dealer said, you still in that AA thing? He said, yeah. He said, one of my best friends really needs help. Could you help him? And see, it's not always about us, right? God moves in mysterious ways. And I've heard a dozen stories like that in Alcoholics Anonymous. My friend Clint, who I miss Clint, he was one of my best friends. He died years ago from cancer, but he was a great man. And Clint told a story about Tom, and I got to meet Tom. Tom was one of the guys Clint sponsored, and Clint was a very strong sponsor when it came to amends. Like, he would say things to you like, well, can I make amends over the phone? Did you do the harm over the phone? He was very direct. I remember he said there's a big difference between making all your amends and all your amends except one. And that is true. Because the one you won't make is probably the most important one. But your fear is wrapped around it. And so Tom, who Clint sponsored, had been worked as a window washer in the day and a burglar at night. They go together very well. Tom had robbed all these houses in a very upscale area of Los Angeles, suburban upscale area. So here he is. He's sober. He's going through the steps. He's made the list of the houses he's robbed. And Clint is not, you can't negotiate this with Clint. You do this stuff. And so he had to go to each house that he robbed. And he was given a routine. The routine was he'd knock on the door. Person answered the door. He'd say, did you live here on such and such a date? And the person would say yes. And he'd say, were you robbed in that date? And he said, yeah, you were burglarized. I'm the guy who did it. And here's some money. And this may not be all of it, but I will make this right no matter what it takes. And he went through, I think it was like maybe 12 of these houses, and no one had him arrested. And no one called, they just accepted. It's hard to have someone arrested that's giving you money. It really is. And nobody arrested him. Everybody was actually pretty good about it. Some guys were a little angry but they were good about it. Gets to the last house, and he knocks on the door, nobody answers. Comes back, knocks on the door, nobody answers. Comes back, knocks on the door. And he just kind of pushes it on the aside. Which I understand that. But Clint is relentless. Clint kept asking, did you make that amends? That last amendment? Well, you need to go back and do that. So he goes back one more time, and he knocks on this door, and this little old man and woman answer the door. And he says, well, did you live here such and such a date? They said, yes. Were you burglarized? They said, yes. I'm the guy who did it, and I'm here to make it right. And their reaction was different than everybody else. They said, please, come in. And they took him into the house, and in the foyer there was a mirror, a big mirror on the wall. And they said to him as they walked by the mirror, how come you pulled the mirror off the wall? And he said, well, I thought maybe there'd be a safe behind it. And he went into the living room, and above the fireplace was a picture. How come you pulled the man's picture? How come you pulled Papa's picture off the wall? He said, once again, I thought maybe there was a safe behind it. And they made him sit down at the coffee table in the living room, and they were sitting across from him, and he took an envelope full of cash, and he pushed it across the table. He said, I want you to take this, and if it's not enough, I'll come back and make the rest. And they pushed it back to him. They said, we don't want this. And he said, listen, you don't understand. I'm in recovery, and I have to make this right. And they said, no, you don't understand. You have just made it right because up until this moment, we thought it was our son that had robbed us. And you never know. You just don't know. The ripple effects of our actions in Alcoholics Anonymous affect not just us, it affects a lot of people. I think there are people that I've made amends to that I'll never see the ripples hit the shore, but they hit the shore in different ways. I got a glimpse of it one time by being on the other side of the fence when a guy came to make amends to me. And it woke me up to something I'd never thought about before. But, I had a pretty successful company. It was 5 retail stores. And I'm sitting in my office one day, and a guy comes in the office, and he confessed coming in that he'd robbed me. They used to wear me out. Employees who you trusted would steal from you. Happened a lot. And I was very, very callous to this. And it happened so much that I had this bad attitude towards humanity in general. You can't try, just a bad attitude. And the guy came in and he said, I worked here, I stole several $1,000s from you. And he put 2 $100 bills on my desk. And he says, I want to make this right. He said, he told me just in passing, he said, I'm sober 10 months. And I eventually found out who his sponsor was, etc. And I was cynical and skeptical. Because, alcoholics, you've around AA for a long time. We overpromise and underdeliver. We just do. We want the bragging rights of a giver and a restorer, but we don't. We're self-serving. So I thought, at least I got $200. I'll throw that in a slush fund and buy pizzas for everybody or something. I didn't think much of it. Next week, came into the office, 2 $100 bills. And the next week, 2 $100 bills. And the next week, 2 $100 bills. Our book says that you will be amazed before you are halfway through. And they're talking about the person making the amends. I never imagined that the person receiving the amends could be amazed before they're halfway through. But I started lighting up when I'd see this guy. I remember I had a window in my office, and I would sit there, and if I saw his car pull into the parking lot, I'd get excited. You know what I mean? Like an old friend or something, right? I get that feeling like, oh, hey. And one time he comes in, and I said, please, come, can you stay a minute? He said, well, not very long. I got to get to work. And I said, listen, I just want you to know something. You've done something for me here. And it's not the money. And truly, it was not the money. You've restored my faith in the goodness of human nature. That I'd lost it. And I said to him, if you ever need a job, I'll hire you back in a second. If you ever need a reference, please come to me. If I can ever do anything for you. And as I'm saying that, I mean that. And I often thought, I wonder if any of my amends had that effect on people. I'll never see the ripples hit the shore, probably. And I don't think I'm supposed to, because I'd probably create a website showing you how wonderful I am. Right? Yes, Bob's done a lot of good here. They say that every practicing alcoholic negatively and painfully affects at least 10 people. I think that's a conservative number. Every boss I ever worked for, every relationship I was ever in, every person I ever cheated or ripped off or did some kind of business thing with. No, by the time I got sober, no one on the planet, including my mother and father who loved me, no one on the planet could talk about having a good experience with Bob in their life. I negatively impacted everyone. Because that's what selfish, self-centered, self-seeking takers do. We hurt people. And I don't even know I'm hurting people. See, I don't think I'm not consciously hurting you. I'm doing for me. I can't see what I'm doing to you because I can't see past me. But I'm stepping on a lot of people's toes. I'm creating a wake and behind me of pain and disappointment. The book refers to us as a tornado going through, destroying people's lives as we go through. And I think that's pretty accurate. So if that is true, and every practicing alcoholic negatively impacts 10 people, how many people does a sober member of AA who's all in, that means they're willing to set themselves aside, put themselves at risk, they don't care, they're willing to go to any lengths, and they devote their life to making these things right, and they devote their life to helping other alcoholics. Their primary purpose of helping other drunks becomes their primary purpose, and their primary purpose is no longer themselves. How many people does a person like that positively impact? 100? 1,000? How about the people that you sponsor and they change their life and now their family's affected? And their children are affected. The people they work with are affected. They're a better employee. How about the people you make amends to, that when you making amends to them and paying back the money reminds them of 2 or 3 people they've never made things right with. And maybe they go pay an old debt because of what you did. And the ripples just keep going. They keep going. Chuck Chamberlain one time said that none of us are capable of seeing the light that Alcoholics Anonymous has brought into the world. He said if you could really see it, it would burn your eyes out. The good that has come into this world. Billy Graham said that back in the 80s, he said he thought that Alcoholics Anonymous was the greatest spiritual movement of the 20th century. And I think that might be right. But we'll talk later today about how AA isn't what AA was in some areas and in some places. But it's this amends thing is amazing. You know, I was talking about the guy who made amends to the drug dealer. I have a drug dealer who, last time I've been seeing him for 50 years, he was part of that family that was bringing in, he was connected to those people bringing in the thousands of kilos of heroin from Southeast Asia back during the Vietnam War. And he liked me, and he just started giving me like 1.25 ounces of heroin. You can't do that to an alcoholic. That stuff got out from under me so quick. I eventually walked away from heroin because I'm a drug addicted alcoholic, but I'm really an alcoholic, so I can walk away from that. Didn't need nothing except just get fed up with it. But I've searched for him, and because I owe him some money. And he was really nice to me. He was not a drug addict. He was just a business guy. And he liked me. He was nice to me. And I've often put myself in his shoes, and if I could find him, I would pay him with the money I owe him. And maybe some interest. And I've looked for him. All I know is his name was Trolley. You don't need to look on the phone. It's not a listed number. But many years ago, at a conference called Lollapalooza, I met a guy who told me he thought he knew. He said, I think that my parents are friends with that guy. I think he has a restaurant in South Philly. I gave him my number. I said, please, find out. This is any chance this is this guy. I really need to talk to him. And it won't be difficult for him. I owe him some money. And I never heard from the guy. I had hope. There was a guy, my last and only friend that I ever had was a guy named Chris Morgan. And in a blackout, we got in a little bit of a beef, evidently, or something. I don't even know what happened. I was in a blackout. I took a hunting knife with a blade about this long, and I ran it through his chest and punctured his lung. And I ended up in jail, and he ended up in intensive care. And I was afraid he was going to die. Matter of fact, the detective that pulled me out of the cell that told me what I did, which I didn't remember, was horrifying. Told me he was probably going to die, and I was going to probably do 20 years to life or something ridiculous. I think he was trying to scare me. Well, if he was doing a good job. And I was horrified. And I get sober, and here this is, man. It's just there. It's just there. I have never been able to effectively sweep things under the rug. I can do it for a little bit, but it always comes out. And so here it is, and I start looking for this guy. And I looked, and I did searches on the internet. I hired a guy one time who was an investigator. I even had a guy from TSA said, I bet you I can find him, and he couldn't find him. I had a friend that was a cop who said, I can't help you. There was a time I could have found him for you. But we're not allowed to use our databases anymore for that stuff. We have to have a case number attached. Because too many cops have gotten in trouble for stalking ex-girlfriends and stuff. So I gave up. And then Henry had me down in Miami several years ago doing a workshop. And I had stopped talking about Chris and this unmade amends that I've searched for. And I talked about it that weekend, and someone came up to me and said to me something I'd heard before. I can help you find him. Yeah, sure. And this woman worked for the Social Security Administration. She said, give me some information. Do you know where he was born? Approximate age? Do you know any places he used to work? And I said, well, yeah, we worked at a couple places together. And I remembered the time. And I gave her that information, and she called me up later, and she said, listen, I found him, but I can't tell you anything. But what I can do is if you'll write him a letter and put his name on the envelope, and then put that envelope inside another envelope and mail it to me at this address, I will forward it to his H&R department where he works. I can't tell you where that is, can't tell you anything. I'll forward it, and then it's up to them whether they want to pass it on to him or not. Well, a couple weeks go by. Kind of wasn't thinking about it. And I get a phone call early in the morning. And I pick up the phone, and it's him. He said, this is Chris. I said, oh my God, Chris, I've been looking for you for 35 years. He said, I want you to know something. I want you to know I forgave you back then, I forgive you now. I said, well, that's beautiful. But I wanted to find you because it sat bad with me all these years. I wanted to know if I owe you any money, if there's anything I can do. I need to try to make this right. And he said to me, he said, I Googled you before I called you. You're an AA, aren't you? I said, yes, I am. He said, well, I'm drinking a beer right now. I said, that's fine, Chris. I'm not trying to get you sober. You knew me. I had to get sober. I was dying. He said, oh, you were really bad. I felt insulted. And he said, I'm glad you're sober. He said, I don't do drugs anymore because my job, they drug test me every week. And I don't drink and drive because I've had too many DUIs. He said, so what I do, he says, I think I'm still drinking, but I got my drinking under control. I only drink, you only hear an alcoholic say that. He said, I only drink on my days off, and I think this was a day off, and then I drink at night when I come home. I drink myself to sleep. And he said, I got it under control. And I said, okay. I said, I'm not trying to get you sober. And we talked a little bit more. And we just talked, about old times and things. And I expressed, I had a lot of gratitude to him. He took me off the streets and got me a job where he worked, let me sleep on his couch in his apartment for a while at a time in my life where I was really bad off. And he was my last and only friend at that time. And I had to, because a lot of amends is not just addressing what you did wrong. It's addressing the selfishness that prevented you and the entitlement that prevented you from even acknowledging and being grateful for the things that people did for you. And a part of my amends to my parents was to thank them for all the sacrifices, things I never acknowledged, because egocentric people have entitlement. We don't even appreciate it. And so I thanked him. And then towards the end, he said, he says, I might be an alcoholic. And I think he sure quacks a lot. He said, if I ever get to a point where I'm in trouble, this gets out of control, I'll call you. And so for some time, we would text or call. I'd call him once in a while, and we'd talk. And then I'll tell you, I was thinking about this yesterday. I haven't talked to him it's been several months now, because it just kind of faded into the background, And my great hope is that one day, maybe he'll call me. And maybe one day I'll realize why it took 35 years to find him, because he had to be closer to getting help. And that maybe, and this is a fantasy, but maybe I'll be able to help him turn his life around one day. And maybe not. I don't know. But I would sure like to do that. I would love to do that. And so it's not my job to change people, to fix people, but it's my job to carry a message, and the message I carry is carried primarily through my actions. It's not what I say, it's what I do. And Alcoholics Anonymous it's an action-based program. These amends are very important. I got to make amends to some situations that were impossible. I turned myself into the courts knowing I'm going to go do 2 years in prison, and I didn't have to. I followed my sponsor's direction to my mother and father, and my sponsor said, when he found out I hadn't talked to my parents in several years, he got very adamant. Well, you need to call your mother. And I explained to him, well, you don't understand. See, they won't take my calls. And he said, I don't know where they pull this stuff from. He said, well, don't call collect. Now, it kind of shines a light on how selfish I was that never occurred to me. Right? That's kind of, I mean, truly. And I called my parents, and I didn't call collect, and they answered the phone, and it was not a homecoming. I really, really hurt them. And so when you really hurt someone, they're very distant and very guarded. And my mother answered that phone, and she, what do you want? That kind of, you get that stuff. You really hurt someone, they protect themselves because you broke their heart. And I told her I paid for the call. She asked me, she says, well, the operator didn't ask me to pay for the call. I said, no, I paid for the call. Her reaction was amazing. Her voice jumped an octave. She went, you paid for the call. And I persisted. And a lot of times with amends, it's persisting. Now, we make direct amends, but there also, in the book, says that sometimes there's a long period of reconstruction ahead. You make the direct amends, and sometimes there's multiple approaches. Because, when you put yourself in their shoes, and I think that's the best thing we can do in trying to make an amends, is to put ourselves in the place of the person we're trying to make amends to and approach them the way we could be approached if the tables were turned. And it makes perfect sense to me that if you really hurt someone and they don't trust you, you're saying you're sorry or giving them a little bit of money is nothing. But if you persist, like the guy that worked for me who came every week with the $100 bills, he persisted and he changed my perception. And he changed me. And so I think we do that. We change people's minds by our actions. Chamberlain used to rub his hands together. He had this Henry was talking about this, how his laugh. He had this little funny little he laugh. He'd rub his hands together and he'd say, we rub away the wreckage of our past through good works. And I think we do. Alcoholics Anonymous is all about action. I run into guys sometimes that drink again after many years of sobriety. And there's a lot of reasons that happens. It basically boils down to one thing. That when it says in chapter 5, those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely, which is a lot, completely give themselves to this simple program. That's what it is, but it has aspects. Some of the aspects are they never did a fourth step. Some of the aspects they never helped anybody. One of the aspects occasionally is that they had unmade amends. And the unmade amends just gnawed at them, and you can sweep it under the rug, you can stay busy, you can all this stuff, but it never really goes away. And I think in the amends, there's two aspects of God's grace. It says there's my business and there's God's business in step 8 and 9. In step 8, it says we made a list, and in the book, it says we already made it, didn't you? We made it when we took inventory. When first time I read that, I thought, wait a minute. You mean I got to make amends to everybody on my resentment list? Well, they're the ones. I got to make amends to everybody on my resentment list. I got to make amends to everything I was afraid to face, every secret. I got to make amends to all the harm I did in sex and relationships. Sandy Beach used to say something that I really think is true. He says it's not about right or wrong. Amends has two actions. You either forgive the person, I mean really forgive them, or you make the direct amends. And that's all there is. Because it's not about right, wrong, it's about reducing the separation. Sometimes you can reduce the separation by really, really, truly forgiving them and allowing them to be exactly the way they are, and it's okay. Other times, you have to reduce the separation by paying them the money by going to them and expressing your remorse and how ashamed you are of what you did to them, and asking them. And I think every good direct amends should be followed by the question, is there anything else that I've done to you that I don't know about? And please tell me how I can make this right. Because I don't know about you guys, but I'm asleep in my own life. I've hurt to this day. I'll find myself every once in a while where all of a sudden, you ever had this experience where you're around someone in a meeting and they act like they have a resentment? Oh, I never did nothing to him. They act like they have a resentment. They act like someone would act if they had their feelings hurt. And so you know what I do? I just go up to them and I say, listen, I am very, very capable of stepping on someone's toes and not even know I'm doing it. And if I've done anything that's hurt you in any way, I don't know what it is, but I'd like to, because I'd like to make it right. Would you please tell me? And the answers I've gotten from that over the years have been in a big spectrum of answers. I had one guy tell me, it was funny, really. He said, yeah, I have a resentment. What did I do? How can I make it right? Well, you think you're better than me. Okay, you resent me for what you think I'm thinking. Is that correct? And I said, listen, I told him the truth. I said, listen, I understand that sometimes my inadequacies and my insecurities create a defense mechanism that I'm not often aware of. And what it appears on the outside to be is smugness. It might be interpreted as arrogance. But I want you to know the truth. When I'm exhibiting that, you can bet that behind it is feelings of inadequacy and insecurity. And the guy, said, well, I have that too. Yeah. Don't we all? And sometimes one guy just was very honest. He said, I just resent you because you seem like you're happier than I am. I said, well, yeah. Oh my God, you're talking about my first few years of sobriety right there. Right? And then I've had guys tell me stuff that I don't even know if it's true. In our book it says the wrongdoings of others fancied or real. And sometimes we fancy stuff, and I don't argue with someone, and I don't straighten them out. They'll tell me I did something, and I'll just say, I didn't know it. It was not my intention, and I don't remember doing it like that, but it's possible. What can I do to make it right? I don't have to be right. I have to make it right. Big difference from being right to making it right. Because it's really about, if Alcoholics Anonymous truly is an altruistic movement, then it's no longer about me. That thing in the prayer of St. Francis that we covet and we try to move towards, it's called self-forgetting. Alcoholics Anonymous starts with a basic decision in step 3 that I want to make. I want to push myself aside, and I want to serve a higher power, a higher set of principles, and a higher purpose than what I have been serving. Because I've been serving Bob, and I've been relying on Bob, and I've been functioning on Bob, and now you're asking me to just push it all aside, Bob. And we're going to start taking our actions to a place where we're serving something greater than ourselves. We're serving a power greater than ourselves. And there's a funny thing that happens when you take these kind of actions consistently. It's the more you take them, the easier they are to take, because you get it after a while. You get it. I'm like that rat who says, I don't want any more of this cheese. I want out of this trap. I don't want to go back to the self-reliance. I may slip into it. I don't want to go back to being the center of my life, and I may slip into that. But I'll tell you something. Truly, my life is better when I'm living by these spiritual principles, and my life is better when I'm trusting God, and my life is better when my primary number one purpose in my life is no longer me. It's you. And just to the extent that I can do that, and I don't, you can ask my wife. I mean, some days I don't do a very good job. Some days, there are a few days where I'm such a good example of they should build a statue of me at General Service Office. And then there are other days where I feel like so inadequate. So like I wish I could have been a better example today. I'm not the best example today that I could have been. And alcohol, but the great thing about Alcoholics Anonymous is you get do-overs. In the realm of the Spirit is a realm of do-overs. And I've seen this, I get it in my life. I truly think my relationship with my wife is a huge piece of my amends to all the screwed up relationships I've had. I get it's a do-over. I still have a lot of work in this area, but honestly and objectively, I believe that I'm the best I've ever been in a relationship with her. Now, to me, that's good news. To her, it's probably like, this is the best? Oh my God. What have I signed up for? But truly, I believe, and I think I'm right, that I'm the best version of Bob I've ever been here. And I want to be that way in AA. I want to be that way and to practice this, to be this guy in all my affairs. And I think maybe that's what we strive for here. We come here so broken. We find a power greater than ourselves. In desperation, we clean up the wreckage of our past. God mixes His grace in our lives, and we get put together. And just like the kintsugi bowl, the gold shines through. God's grace shines through. I don't have to doubt the existence of God. I just have to watch what happens to you. And I can see that clearly. I can't always see it in me, but I can see it in you. I can see God's grace in the people I sponsor often. And that's why guys like me sponsor people. I try to make amends when I can. I have a sponsor who I let the discernment of that rest in my sponsor's hands. I try to help God's kids. And just like the phoenix, out of the ashes of a burnt down life, emerges God's idea of Bob. Who knew? Who knew? And maybe that's true for you. Maybe you are a better person you've ever been in your whole life. Not perfect. Absolutely not perfect. But spiritual growth is like walking towards the horizon. You can walk and walk and walk and walk endlessly and make amazing amount of progress and look up and the horizon's still out there. It doesn't mean you haven't come a long way. It's just there's no destination here. The beauty and the grace is discovered in the journey. And so, if you're new here, come join us. Come join us. Do what we do. Because that's what we do, isn't it? It's Alcoholics Anonymous. It's just monkey see, monkey do. That's all it is. It's like a giant conga line. You just come into your home, get a home group, find an old timer in the home group, and follow him and do what he does. It's like when he, in the conga line, when he shakes his butt to the right, you shake your butt to the right. When he shakes his butt to the left, you shake your butt to the left. And somewhere in the journey on the conga line, you're transformed. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Bob. There may be hope for me. You know, when I first came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I did the steps off the wall, you know, the window shades, and you know what I got, right? Off the wall results. And then I got connected with this group of guys. You heard I think Henry say something about 3 Legacy, and I got connected with the 3 Legacy group, and I thought, wow, man, this is advanced AA, you know. And then I was pointed to the part in our book where it says this is the basic text. You know, so I keep getting humbled. It's interesting. I just moved back to Richmond, Virginia, and it occurred to me the other day I was going to a meeting, and this fear came over me because there was a lady there that I had written an amends letter. Our book says write an honest letter, and I wrote an honest letter and sent it out, but never heard anything back. And I started thinking, what if she's in this meeting? So I dug through my email and I found that email and printed it out and put it in an envelope, stuck it in my big book. I thought I was going to a big book meeting. It was not. It was a step meeting, and it was on step 9. I was scanning the whole room and I didn't see her, but you can bet that letter is going to stay in my big book because I will probably inevitably run into her, and I have to be willing to make that approach. Thank you very much, Bob. I really appreciate it. We're going to take a break. It's 2:46. We're going to be back right around 3 o'clock. Okay, and be thinking about dinner because when I step back up here, I'm going to try to get the count for dinner. All right.
This little piece of plastic is Robert.
Don't forget the Ask It basket. Ask It basket. Because if we don't get a lot of questions in the Ask It basket, Bob goes and asks you questions.
I have enough of that.